Hello, my name is Lucas Merrick, 40 years old, living in Seattle, Washington. I am the Chief Financial Officer of Merrick Industries, the corporation my father, Grant Merrick, built from scratch. It sounds powerful, but the truth is I'm only a figurehead. My father, he controls everything. I'm just a puppet in his hands, a faint shadow under the dazzling aura of the Merrick family. I'm not the strong type. I know that. I don't have my father's commanding presence, nor the sharpness of my younger brother, Andrew, and I certainly don't have the confidence to stand up to them. I'm just Lucas, the husband, the father who tries to fulfill his duties but always feels like he's falling short. Every morning as I stand in front of the bathroom mirror, I look into my tired eyes and ask myself, what am I doing with my life? But then I think of Sam, my son, and I know I have to keep going for him. Sam, my son, 12 years old. He's so smart that sometimes I feel like I can't keep up with him. Sam has messy brown hair, bright eyes that seem eager to explore the entire world, and a fierce passion for technology. Last year, Sam won first place in the school's robotics competition, and I still vividly remember the way he ran to me, hugging me tightly, beaming with joy. Dad, I did it. In that moment, I felt like a real father, not the failure my father always said I was. But my father, Grant Merrick, never sees those things. To him, I'm a great disappointment. He's 70 years old, but still as strong as an ox. His hair is silver white, his face stern with sharp, cold features, and his voice can make anyone tremble. He is the founder of Merrick Industries, a billion-dollar manufacturing and technology empire. But to me, he's not just a successful businessman. He's a domineering, patriarchal father and sometimes a ruthless man. I still remember the times he yelled at my mother, Evelyn, right in front of me and Andrew. My mother is a gentlewoman with blonde hair now streaked with silver and eyes always filled with sadness. She has endured him through 40 years of marriage, and I know deep down she's exhausted. Once I saw her sitting alone in the living room holding a glass of wine, her eyes brimming with tears. I wanted to run to her, to hug her, to tell her that I understood, that I too was living in my father's shadow. But I couldn't. I was too weak, too afraid. Andrew, my younger brother, is a different story. At 35, Andrew is a younger, sharper version of our father. He's tall, handsome, with a smile that can instantly win people's trust. But I know, behind that smile lies cunning. Andrew is the vice president of Merrick Industries, and our father always sees him as the true heir. Andrew has vision, my father would say right in front of me. And you, Lucas, you just sit behind a desk and sign useless papers. Those words, though I've heard them hundreds of times, still make my heart ache. I don't hate Andrew. Perhaps deep down I'm just jealous. He has everything I don't. Confidence, our father's support, and the ruthlessness needed to survive in the world our father created. But I know Andrew never sees me as a brother. To him, I'm just an obstacle, a superfluous presence in his and our father's grand plans. Sam, my son, sees things differently. He loves me, I know that. But he also hates how my father treats me. Once, after witnessing my father berate me during dinner, Sam ran to his room and slammed the door. That night, I knocked on his door and found him sitting on his bed, clutching his laptop tightly. "Dad, why don't you fight back?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why do you let Grandpa say those awful things?" I didn't know how to answer. I just hugged him and whispered, "I'm sorry, Sam. I just want everything to be okay." But the truth is, nothing is okay. Merrick Industries is standing on the edge of a storm. In recent months, I've overheard whispers in the boardroom about failed investments, accounting irregularities, and pressure from shareholders. I'm the CFO, but my father and Andrew never let me access the critical documents. They only give me sanitized numbers, polished reports. I know something's wrong, but I don't dare ask. I'm afraid. Afraid that if I question them, my father will give me that look of contempt and Andrew will smirk as if I'm a fool. Every day I go to work feeling like I'm stepping into a battlefield without weapons. The employees look at me with pity or worse, suspicion. They know I have no real power. They know who truly runs Merrick Industries. Sam is the only one who makes me feel like I still have worth. He often sits and tells me about his tech projects, about how he programmed a robot to pick up trash automatically, or how he hacked into the school's computer system, just to mess with his friends, of course. I laugh, but deep down, I worry. Sam is too smart, too curious. I'm afraid that one day he'll dig too deep into this family's secrets, and that will pull him into dangerous territory. One evening, as I sat in my study staring at the pile of papers on my desk without really reading them, Sam walked in. He was holding a USB drive, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Dad, I want you to see this," he said, his voice full of enthusiasm. "I just wrote a program to analyze data. Imagine if I could apply it to Grandpa's company. Maybe find ways to save money or catch some errors." I smiled, but a wave of unease washed over me. "Sam, you're so smart," I said, ruffling his hair. "But the company, it's more complicated than you think. Just focus on school, okay?" He looked at me, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "Dad, I just want to help. I know you're not happy, I see it." Sam's words cut through my heart like a knife. I wanted to tell him I was fine, that I could handle everything, but I couldn't lie. Not to Sam. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. The sound of waves from Puget Sound echoed in, reminding me of my own insignificance. I thought about my mother, about the years she endured my father. I thought about Sam, about how I don't want him to grow up in the shadow of this family. And I thought about myself, a 40-year-old man who still feels like a scared boy in front of his father. It was Tuesday, a day that seemed ordinary at first. I drove to the headquarters of Merrick Industries, located in downtown Seattle, where skyscrapers with glass facades reflected blinding sunlight. My office was on the 20th floor, a spacious room with windows overlooking Elliott Bay. But that luxury didn't make me feel powerful. On the contrary, it made me feel small, like someone placed in a chair far too big for their stature. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and began reviewing financial reports. The numbers danced before my eyes, but they told me nothing. I knew they had been manipulated, polished by my father's and Andrew's accounting team. I was just the one who signed off, a soulless rubber stamp. Every time I tried to ask about an unusual expense or an unclear transaction, my father would brush me off. "Lucas, just do your job. Leave the big stuff to me and Andrew." And Andrew, with his signature smirk, would chime in, "Big brother, don't worry, we've got it under control." But that morning, something was off. The atmosphere at the company was heavier than usual. Employees whispered to each other in the hallways, avoiding my gaze. When I walked into the boardroom for the quarterly shareholders meeting, I saw my father and Andrew already seated at the head of the table. My father, in an expensive gray suit, fixed me with a piercing, cold stare. Andrew, as usual, wore a smug smile, but I noticed a hint of tension in the way he tapped his fingers on the table. "Lucas," my father began, his voice low and commanding. "Today we need to have a serious talk." I swallowed hard, feeling like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "Yes, sir," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's this about?" My father didn't answer immediately. He pushed a thick stack of documents toward me. "Open it and see," he said, his voice as cold as ice. My hands trembled as I picked up the documents. It was a financial report, but not like the ones I usually saw. The numbers were bolded with red-inked notes highlighting irregular expenses and transfers with unclear origins. And at the bottom of each page was my signature. The signature I had scrawled hundreds of times, never reading closely because my father always said, "Just sign, Lucas, don't waste time." "What is this?" I asked, my voice faltering. My heart began to race. "This," my father said, emphasizing each word, "is proof that you've embezzled $10 million from the company's funds." The world around me seemed to stop. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. "What?" I stammered. "Dad, I would never do that." Andrew cut in, his voice smooth but laced with mockery. "Lucas, don't play innocent, we've checked. All these transactions went through your accounts. Your signature is everywhere." I flipped through the documents, desperately searching for a clue, an explanation. But the numbers, the lines of text, they were like a maze with no exit. Cold sweat trickled down my spine. "Dad, I swear, I don't know anything about this," I said, my voice almost pleading. "I just did what you and Andrew told me to." My father slammed his hand on the table, the sound making me flinch. "Don't make excuses, Lucas," he roared. "You're the CFO, you're responsible. Or are you saying you're so useless you didn't even know where the company's money was going?" I couldn't respond. I just sat there, feeling like the world was crumbling around me. Andrew looked at me, his eyes like those of a snake watching its prey. "Lucas," he said, feigning concern, "if you confess, we might still salvage the family's reputation. Don't let this go any further." I wanted to scream, to slam the table, to run out of that room, but I couldn't. I just sat there, my mind blank, feeling like a trapped animal. My father stood up, glaring at me with utter contempt. "Get ready to go to prison, you useless fool. Don't expect me to go easy on you just because you're my son," he said. After my father and Andrew left the room, I remained seated, my trembling hands clutching the documents. I didn't know what to do. I had no evidence, no way to fight back. All I knew was that somehow my father and Andrew had orchestrated this. They wanted me to take the fall, to be the scapegoat, to protect Merrick Industries, or worse, to protect themselves. I drove home in a state of panic. My house, once a place of peace, now offered no comfort. Clara, my wife, was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She immediately sensed something was wrong. "Lucas, what's the matter?" she asked, setting down her knife. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I told Clara everything, every word my father said, every glance from Andrew. She listened, gripping my hand tightly. "Lucas, you didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice firm. "We'll find a way. You can't let them pin this on you." But I wasn't sure. I felt like I was falling into a trap and I didn't know how to escape. That evening, I couldn't eat. I sat in the living room, staring out the window, trying to find a way out in my mind. But every thought led me to the same conclusion. I wasn't strong enough to confront my father and Andrew. Late that night, after Clara had gone to bed, I heard soft footsteps. Sam appeared at the door, wearing his favorite robot-themed pajamas. "Dad, I heard Mom talking," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "You didn't do anything wrong, did you?" I looked at my son, my heart tightening. "Sam, I hesitated, unsure of what to say. "I don't even know what's happening anymore." Sam walked over and sat beside me. "I believe you," he said, his eyes shining with conviction. "And I'm going to help you, I promise." I gave a weak smile, thinking he was just trying to comfort me. I didn't want Sam getting involved in this. He was only 12, too young to face the dark secrets of the Merrick family. The next day, I received a call from my mother. Her voice trembled over the phone. "Lucas, you need to be careful," she said. "Your father, he's planning something. I don't know the details, but it doesn't feel right." I wanted to ask more, but she hung up quickly as if afraid someone might overhear. I began to sense the danger. My father and Andrew didn't just want to push me out of the company, they wanted to destroy me. And I knew that if I didn't find a way to fight back, I would lose everything. My honor, my family, and Sam's future. But I didn't know where to begin. In the days that followed, I lived like a shadow, silently going to work, silently returning to our suburban Seattle home where Clara and Sam were waiting for me. Clara tried to keep things normal, cooking dinners I couldn't bring myself to eat, while Sam looked at me with eyes full of concern, as if reassuring me that everything would be okay. But I didn't feel okay at all. I was just Lucas Merrick, a weak man trapped in the shadow of his father. There were only a few days left until I had to appear in court to defend myself. The subpoena had arrived at our house the previous week, like a cold dagger plunged into my heart. Since that day, I had barely slept. Night after night, I sat motionless in my study, the desk lamp casting light on the stack of documents my father had thrown at me, trying to dissect every detail, searching for a tiny loophole, a faint glimmer of hope in the maze of numbers and signatures. But it was futile. My father and Andrew had been too meticulous, too ruthless. They had set up a perfect trap, turning me into a flawless scapegoat. Every financial report was expertly forged, and the transactions I knew nothing about bore my signature. I felt like a man standing on the edge of an abyss, each step bringing me closer to the dark void waiting below. On the day of the trial, I felt as though my body no longer belonged to me. I stood in front of the mirror trying to tie my tie, but my hands trembled so badly I couldn't manage the knot. Clara walked in and placed her hand on my shoulder. "Lucas, you'll get through this," she said, her voice steady. But her eyes couldn't hide her worry. I gave her a weak smile, not wanting her to see how terrified I was. The trial took place at the federal courthouse in downtown Seattle. As I stepped into the courtroom, the cold air made me shiver. The polished wooden benches, the harsh fluorescent lights, and the murmurs of the people present, all of it weighed heavily on me. My father, Grant Merrick, sat in the front row, his expensive gray suit doing nothing to mask the icy glint in his eyes. Andrew, my brother, sat beside him, wearing the smug smile I had seen 100 times before. They were predators, and I was their prey. The judge, an older man with a stern face, banged his gavel to call for order. My father's legal team, the most expensive lawyers Merrick Industries could hire, stood up to present their case. They produced stacks of documents, financial reports with my signature, bank transfers to foreign accounts I knew nothing about. "Lucas Merrick," the lead attorney said, his voice as smooth as a snake's, "has embezzled $10 million from company funds, causing severe damage to Merrick Industries and its shareholders." I sat next to my lawyer, an old college friend who was the only one willing to take my case at a fee I could afford. He tried to defend me, questioning the authenticity of the documents, but I could see he was up against an army. Andrew was called to the witness stand, and with his handsome appearance and convincing tone, he spun a meticulously crafted story. That I had secretly siphoned off funds, that I had abused my position as CFO for personal gain. "I'm deeply sorry to say this," Andrew said, feigning a sigh, his eyes lowered as if he were genuinely heartbroken. "But my brother betrayed our family and the company." I wanted to scream, to stand up and shout that it was all a lie, but I couldn't. I just sat there, feeling the world collapse around me. My father looked at me, his gaze saying, "You deserve this, Lucas. You've always been a failure." I bowed my head, my breathing heavy as if the air in the room was being sucked away. As my lawyer prepared to call me to the stand to defend myself, a small but resolute voice rang out from the back of the courtroom. "Your Honor, I have evidence." I turned around, my heart pounding. Sam stood there in his school uniform, his brown hair a mess and his eyes blazing with determination. Clara stood beside him, trying to pull him back, but Sam shook her off and stepped toward the judge. "I'm Sam Merrick, Lucas Merrick's son. I have evidence proving my dad is innocent." The courtroom erupted into chaos. My father shot to his feet, his face red with fury. "What is this kid doing here?" he bellowed, his voice trembling with anger. "This is no place for children." Andrew frowned, but I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes, something I had never seen before. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. "Young man, you say you have evidence?" he asked, his tone serious but not harsh. "Explain yourself." Sam took a deep breath and stepped forward, holding a small USB drive. "I have video footage and documents proving that my grandfather, Grant Merrick, and my uncle Andrew set my dad up to take the blame." I felt the blood freeze in my veins. "Sam," I whispered, trying to stand, but my lawyer held me back. Clara looked at me, her eyes full of worry, but I knew there was no stopping Sam now. He was determined, and in that moment I realized that Sam wasn't just a curious boy. He was 100 times braver than I could ever be. Sam began to speak, his voice clear and steady, not at all like that of a 12-year-old. "I love technology and I mess around with it sometimes," he said, his eyes scanning the courtroom. "A few months ago, I secretly installed a mini camera in my grandfather's home office. I didn't mean any harm, I just wanted to see how he worked, thinking, Maybe I could learn something from him. The courtroom fell silent, every eye fixed on Sam. My father clenched his fists, his face paling. Andrew started tapping his fingers on his chair, a nervous habit. "Last week," Sam continued, "I reviewed the footage from the camera. I overheard a conversation between my grandfather and Uncle Andrew. They talked about framing my dad, saying he was the scapegoat to save the company from an investigation. I saved that footage here." Sam held up the USB drive as if it were a sword, but Sam wasn't done. "I also found important documents," he said, his voice brimming with confidence. "One day when Grandpa wasn't home, I sneaked into his office. I knew he had security on his computer, but I hacked into it." Sam hesitated for a second, as if aware that this action could get him in trouble. "I learned how to crack passwords from the robotics club. I found emails and internal accounting files proving that Grandpa and Uncle Andrew falsified the books to frame my dad." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. My father stood up again, his voice nearly a shout. "This kid is lying. He's just a child. How could he possibly hack my computer?" But the judge raised a hand, motioning for him to sit down. Sam handed the USB to the court clerk and a large screen was set up. When the video played, my father's voice echoed, cold and ruthless. "Pin it all on Lucas. He's useless. Let him take the fall for us. I told the accounting team to manipulate the numbers. His signature is everywhere. No one will suspect a thing." Andrew's voice followed, smug and assured. "All right, Dad. I'll make sure the board believes Lucas is the traitor. Once he's out of the way, we'll get through this investigation." My heart felt like it stopped. Those words, like daggers, confirmed what I had feared for so long. My father and Andrew didn't just want to push me out of the company, they wanted to obliterate me. I looked at Sam, standing there, small but powerful, like a warrior facing the world. The judge requested to see the documents Sam had obtained. The emails and accounting files were displayed on the screen with transactions clearly annotated, showing how my father and Andrew had manipulated the books. There were transfers to foreign accounts, expenses without invoices, all forged to make it look like I was responsible. My father tried to object, but his voice faltered, lacking its usual authority. Andrew sat silently, his face pale, the smug smile gone. The judge announced a recess to verify the legality of the evidence. I looked at Sam, feeling both grateful and terrified. He had done what I never dared to dream of, but I also knew his actions had put us both in a dangerous position. During the recess, I pulled Sam into a corner and hugged him tightly. "You did amazing," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "But you have to be careful. Grandpa, he won't forgive this." Sam looked at me, his eyes blazing. "I'm not scared, Dad," he said. "I just want to protect you." I hugged Sam tighter, feeling a strength I had never known. In that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, I wouldn't let Sam fight alone. When the trial resumed, the judge returned with a stern expression. He announced that Sam's evidence, the video footage from the mini-camera and the documents obtained from my father's computer, had been preliminarily verified. "We need more time to assess the legality and authenticity," he said, his voice steady. "But what has been presented today is sufficient to temporarily suspend the charges against Lucas Merrick. The trial will continue next week with the involvement of accounting and technical experts to analyze the evidence." My father shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "This is a farce," he bellowed, pointing at Sam. "That kid broke into my private property. This evidence is illegal." Andrew chimed in, his voice smooth but betraying tension. "Your Honor, we request that this evidence be dismissed. A 12-year-old cannot be considered a credible witness." My lawyer, Michael, stood up to object. "Your Honor, the evidence presented is clear and verifiable. We request that the court summon additional witnesses from Merrick Industries' accounting department to clarify the transactions." The judge nodded, jotting something down, then banged his gavel to end the session. I looked at my father and saw his gaze, sharp as a blade, directed at me and Sam. I knew he wouldn't stop. The days that followed were a string of sleepless nights. Clara and I tried to keep Sam at home, preventing him from going to school out of fear that my father might retaliate. But Sam remained resolute, insisting he wouldn't hide. "If I'm scared, then Grandpa wins, Dad," he said, his voice full of determination. I didn't know how a 12-year-old could be stronger than me, but I knew I had to try. For Sam, for Clara, and for myself. Michael, my lawyer, worked tirelessly. He contacted former accounting employees of Merrick Industries who had left because they couldn't withstand the pressure from my father and Andrew. One of them, Anna, agreed to testify. Anna had been the head of accounting but quit after my father forced her to do things against her conscience. In secret meetings, Anna confirmed that my father and Andrew had instructed her to manipulate figures, creating fake transactions to frame me. "I didn't want to do it," Anna said, her voice trembling. "But Mr. Grant, he threatened to ruin my career if I didn't comply." The new evidence began to pile up. Michael hired a team of technical experts to analyze the files Sam had retrieved from my father's computer. They confirmed that the accounting documents had been altered with falsified timestamps to make the transactions appear recent. Furthermore, the footage from Sam's mini camera was proven to be authentic, with no signs of tampering. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the wall protecting me, but I still felt uneasy. My father was a powerful man with connections I could never dream of. He could bribe, intimidate, or do whatever it took to turn the tables. The next trial session, held a week later, was even more tense than the last. My father and Andrew had hired a new legal team, led by a man notorious for overturning seemingly unwinnable cases. They attacked the legitimacy of Sam's evidence, arguing that his hacking and camera installation violated privacy laws. "A child cannot be considered a reliable source," my father's lawyer said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The boy was clearly manipulated, possibly by the defendant himself, Lucas Merrick. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to suppress my anger. Michael countered, presenting Anna's testimony and the technical reports. "These documents weren't just taken from Mr. Grant Merrick's computer," Michael said, his voice firm. "They've been corroborated by independent witnesses and experts. The falsified transactions bear Lucas Merrick's signature, but there's no evidence he directly executed them." Sam was called to the witness stand, and my heart felt like it stopped. The small boy in his school uniform stood before the entire courtroom, but he showed no fear. He recounted how he installed the mini camera in my father's home office, how he hacked the computer using skills learned from the robotics club. "I just wanted to protect my dad," Sam said, his voice clear. "I knew he didn't do anything wrong, and I couldn't let Grandpa and Uncle Andrew destroy him." The courtroom was silent, with only Sam's breathing audible through the microphone. The judge looked at him, his expression softening slightly. "Young man, you understand that what you did may have broken the law, don't you?" he asked. Sam nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, but I had no other choice. I just wanted the truth to come out." I looked at Sam, feeling both proud and heartbroken. He had put his entire future on the line to save me. I wanted to run up and hug him, to apologize for not being strong enough to protect myself. But I could only sit there waiting for fate's verdict. In the subsequent hearings, the tide began to turn in my favor. Anna testified, detailing how my father and Andrew coerced her into falsifying records. The technical experts presented their analysis, showing that the fake transactions originated from Andrew's computer, not mine. My father tried to argue back, but his voice lacked its former authority. Andrew was almost silent, his gaze distant, as if he knew the game was over. Finally, on the day of the verdict, the judge stood, his voice ringing clear in the courtroom. "Based on the evidence presented, the court finds that Lucas Merrick is not guilty of embezzlement. The charges against him are dismissed. Instead, the evidence indicates that Grant Merrick and Andrew Merrick orchestrated a scheme of financial fraud, manipulating records to frame Lucas Merrick." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. I felt as though a ton of weight had been lifted from my chest. Clara gripped my hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sam ran to me, hugging me tightly. "Dad, I knew you'd be okay," he said, his voice choked with emotion. My father and Andrew were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. My father gave me one last look, his eyes no longer filled with contempt but with an emptiness, as if he couldn't believe he had lost. Andrew kept his head down, avoiding everyone's gaze. They were charged with financial fraud, facing prison time and massive reparations to Merrick Industries. As we left the courthouse, I hugged Sam and Clara, feeling as though I had been given a new lease on life. I had reclaimed my honor, not just for myself, but for my family. But above all, I knew this victory wasn't mine. It belonged to Sam, the 12-year-old boy who had bravely stood up to an empire to protect his father. More than a year has passed since the trial ended, and I stood at the window of our suburban Seattle home, looking out at the small garden where Sam was tinkering with a homemade robot. He laughed loudly as the robot wobbled while picking up a fallen leaf, and I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of relief, as if the invisible chains that had bound me for so long had finally been broken. The trial was over. The truth had been revealed, and I, Lucas Merrick, was no longer a criminal in anyone's eyes. But more than that, I was no longer a prisoner of myself. The official verdict for my father, Grant Merrick, and my brother, Andrew, was announced on a cold autumn morning. My father was sentenced to 7 years in prison for financial fraud and manipulating records, along with a massive fine to compensate Merrick Industries. Andrew received a 5-year sentence as an accomplice. I wasn't at the courthouse when the verdict was read, but Michael, my lawyer, called to tell me about it. "They didn't say a word, Lucas," he said. "Grant just sat there, silent, and Andrew kept his head down. They probably knew there was no way out." I didn't feel vindicated. Instead, there was an emptiness. My father had once been the man I feared and longed for approval from. Andrew was my brother, whom I had hoped would see me as family. But they had chosen their own paths, and I couldn't change that. All I knew was that from now on I would live for myself and the people I loved. Merrick Industries, after the storm, descended into chaos. The board of directors wanted me to stay, even offering me the position of chairman to lead the company through the crisis. They said I had proven my integrity and resilience, that I was the right person to rebuild the empire my father had left behind. But every time I stepped into my old office, I felt suffocated. The glass walls, the endless meetings, the scrutinizing stares, they all reminded me of the years I spent living in my father's shadow. I knew I didn't belong there. One evening, I sat down with Clara and Sam and shared the decision I had been mulling over for a long time. "I want to resign," I said, my voice soft but certain. "I'm not cut out for the cutthroat competition, the scheming, or the power struggles. I want to do something that's truly mine." Clara took my hand, her eyes full of support. "What do you want to do, Lucas?" she asked. I smiled, feeling like I was 20 again when I still had dreams my father had crushed. "I want to open a small restaurant," I said. "I love cooking. Ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be in the kitchen, experimenting with recipes, making dishes that bring people joy. But Dad, he always said a man should aim for big things, not hide away in a kitchen." Sam looked up from his laptop, his eyes sparkling. "Dad, that's awesome. I want to eat pizza you make." He laughed loudly, and I couldn't help but laugh along. Clara nodded, placing her hand on my shoulder. "If that's what you want, I'm with you. Always." I resigned a week later. The board tried to convince me to stay, but my mind was made up. I handed over my responsibilities to Anna, the former head of accounting who had testified at the trial. Anna was a smart, honest woman with the strength to guide Merrick Industries through its turbulent times. I knew the company would be in good hands with her. As I left the glass skyscraper for the last time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was no longer the CFO, no longer my father's puppet. I was just Lucas, an ordinary man ready to start anew. My small restaurant, named Merrick's Kitchen, opened on a quiet street corner in Seattle near Puget Sound. It wasn't as fancy as the restaurants my father used to take me to, but it was mine. I spent hours in the kitchen experimenting with bread recipes, making marinara sauce from fresh tomatoes, and baking fragrant apple pies. Each dish was a piece of me, dreams buried since childhood now brought back to life. Customers started coming, at first just a few acquaintances, then gradually more. They praised the food, the cozy atmosphere of the restaurant, and I realized that for the first time in my life I was doing something I truly loved. My mother, Evelyn, had changed too. After the trial, she filed for divorce from my father. "I've put up with him for too long," she told me one afternoon when she visited the restaurant. "I want to live for myself, Lucas, and I want to be close to you and Sam." I invited her to live with us in our warm suburban home. Clara and Sam welcomed her with open arms, and for the first time, I saw my mother smile without a trace of sadness in her eyes. Our home was now filled with laughter. Sam was still busy with his tech projects, but he often joined me in the kitchen to help, though most of the time he was sneaking bites of food. Clara took on managing the restaurant, with organizational skills I always admired. My mother loved sitting in a corner of the restaurant, reading books and chatting with customers, as if rediscovering the freedom she had lost over the years. We were no longer under pressure, no longer oppressed by harsh words or contemptuous glares. We were just a family living simply and happily. One evening after the restaurant had closed, I stood on the balcony looking out at Puget Sound shimmering under the moonlight. Sam came out holding a mug of hot cocoa. "Dad, I think you did the right thing," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "I like seeing you happy." I hugged Sam, my heart overflowing. "Thank you, Sam," I said. "If it weren't for you, I don't know where I'd be." He smiled, resting his head on my shoulder. "Dad, I just wanted you to be free." And I was free. No longer my father's puppet, no longer a shadow of Merrick Industries. I was Lucas Merrick, a husband, a father, a chef, and above all, a man who had found himself again. Merrick's Kitchen wasn't just a restaurant. It was my new home, where I built dreams no one could hold back. Seattle was still windy. Puget Sound still sparkled, but now I no longer felt small before the world. I had found my place, and I knew, no matter what life brought, I would never let myself be imprisoned again.